everyone. We're ready for another live with CCO. It's exciting to be with you. And tonight we'll be talking about the new codes that have dropped. We've taken just a segment of the new codes that have dropped for 2024, the ICD-10 codes, and we're going to specifically look at the SDOHs, or the social determinations of health codes. The reason that we wanted to break these up and look at them individually is because the SDOH, or the social determination of health codes, are what everybody's talking about right now. These are relatively new to the code set. Now, there's been codes that have been used for some time. However, there is a significant focus on using these codes to the highest specificity now that we have them. Remember, we code for statistical purposes. It happens to be a convenient way to get paid. And statistically, we can better serve the patients, or the patient population that we have, by understanding some of those social situations that affect their health. Let's dive in and let's look at the new codes for 2024, the changes that are going to be made on these SDOH codes. We've made this great 2-page document that will stay up, and we color coded these a little bit. So we're taking the specific codes that were either deleted or the new codes that were added in a specific range. We know that the SDOH codes are Z55 through Z65, and then there's Z75 also. So that's the code range that we're looking at. So again, let's break these down and let's see what we're dealing with. Sandy says that she doesn't have sound, but I think everything's working on our end. We'll double check for you. In the meantime, I'll just keep going. All right. So no changes for the Z58, but they deleted the excludes to occupational exposure Z57, and they added an excludes to information on the occupational exposure for Z57. So we need to go in and look at those. Great. Thank you for verifying, Michelle and Samantha, that you can hear me. So there has been some change on Z58, problems related to physical environment. I'm sorry. No, there is no. And then Z59, they have not made any changes with the problems related to housing and economic circumstances. Now, you guys probably know that last year we had a lot of additions in these Z codes, and uh, again, this is much more prevalent in what we're doing. I don't know for sure. You guys can let me know if they've started adding these to quality measures, MIPS, and stuff like that, where they're starting to track them. I would think that they are, but I'd be real curious if you guys are in the midst of that. And if you are, which one of the codes have you guys been using to track? Okay, now, uh, moving on, if we look at Z59, that when we went to Z59.3, problems related to living in residential institutions, they revised the verbiage on the excludes. So it is institutional upbringing Z62.2. They have revised it and made it Z62.22. Okay. Uh, Z60, the problems related to social environment, they added the Z60.8, other problems related to social environment, inadequate social support and lack of emotional support. So let's think about why that's pertinent for us to understand. And as educators, we want to make sure that we're letting our providers know that we can translate that for them, And therefore, to have that added to the documentation, give them the verbiage if this is applicable to their patients to be able to use. So, related to social environment, if they have inadequate social support, that to me translates as somebody that is not able to get out and about anymore. And so they are no longer going and visiting with friends. They may not be able to go to their place of worship. Maybe they're not even able to go get their hair done. If you're a lady that would go in weekly and have your hair rolled up or every 2 weeks, again, that social interaction is inadequate. Now, also, lack of emotional support, how do you define that specifically? But again, a person that doesn't have a good support system, a person that doesn't have a people to come and visit them, lack of family. Now, I'm not just thinking, geriatric is probably what comes to mind first. Is having inadequate social support or lack of emotional support. But this isn't applicable just to the geriatric population. There are other age groups that can be impacted in this way. Lack of emotional support, again, could be that, uh, again, I'm just kind of grasping at straws here, but uh, uh, what if a person goes off to college, and they are not, they don't have a car to get around as well, or they're not able to. That could be inadequate social support where they couldn't connect. I am seeing, Jesus, my computer is whirring. I'm back. Jesus, I saw my computer pause, and so I don't know if there was an issue.
Yeah, it did slow down and freeze up a little bit for about 15 seconds or so. So if you could just rewind a little bit, that'd be fine.
Okay, so again, I was thinking of possibly a person that was in college that didn't have um, the ability to get out. And of course, going and taking college classes, you would think that they would be out and socially around people. But what if they don't have that emotional support? They're away from their family, they're seeing new people. If they're not the type of personality that's comfortable getting out and meeting new people, they may have a lack of emotional support. And so those are the areas that just pop into my head for Z60.8. Now we move on to our Z62 codes. Let's bring those up to the top. Problems related to upbringing. Now, again, we can probably always laugh that back in the day, back in the 80s and the 90s, this if you went to see a psychiatrist or therapy, it was always your mother's fault, right? Everything's your parents' fault. But that's not exactly what this is saying. It is Z62.2. There is no change in uh, the phrasing of the description except for they deleted child in care of non parental family member and child in welfare guardianship was added. That wasn't available before. And again, I think that verbiage is a more standardized. If you have a person that has somebody that has guardianship over them, that would be a non-parental family member. Could be now guardianship could be with a family member, but I think that's kind of like what they were trying to say and didn't have proper verbiage, in my opinion. Again, I'd love to hear what you guys think, how this could be applicable. But child in welfare guardianship would be child and welfare custody. Again, I like that verbiage much better. It makes more sense. They did delete the excludes to problem for parent due to child in welfare custody, the Z63.5 that was taken out. Then we have Z62.22 institutional upbringing. They revised and changed the verbiage from child living in orphanage or group home to child living in group home. And I think most likely that was done because the term orphanage is antiquated. I don't think that is used anymore, and might have uh, why would you use that if it's we don't use the word orphanage in the U.S. anymore. So again, they've revised it, taking out the term orphanage and just state child living in group home, which would fall under the Z62.22 institutional upbringing. They did add separately child living in orphanage if that's applicable, but they distinguish again, it's pretty antiquated. So uh, they split those up and took out orphanage, and we have child living in a group home and added that orphanage is its antiquated verbiage by itself. They also added a Z under Z62.22 code also. Now, for some of us who are used to the code sets, we always pay attention to the codes also. So we pay attention to the excludes and use an addition. If you see that code also anywhere in your manual or surrounding the code, that should set those spidey coding senses off that, hey, you need to pay attention. But again, it doesn't mean that it is always applicable. And for any of you who are students or new to the code set, it can get very confusing because you'll see that and say, "Oh, wait a minute, I have to code that." No, it clearly states if applicable. It's telling you that you need to add this if it's applicable or it pertains to your patient. So, child in welfare custody, Z62.21, would also be appended. So, just because a child is in a group home or in an orphanage, I guess. But again, I keep saying it's antiquated. I don't know of any orphanages left in the United States. They're classified as group homes, from what I understand. So if the patient is on welfare custody, and that's very specific, it's not the same as guardianship. Welfare custody is very, very specific. Then it would also need to be appended the Z62.21. That makes a specific different translation. So you can have a Z62.22 and a Z62.21. A child could be in a group home, and they could also be under welfare custody, or they could be under welfare custody and not be in a group home. They usually are, from my understanding, though. There could be another scenario, however. All right, moving on, we have a Z62.23 was added, child in custody of non-parental relative. So this is further divided into include who is the relative but is not the parent. And we have the non parental family member. We can use custody of grandparent in kinship care and guardianship by non parental relative. Now, you notice that verbiage that we had seen that before, but they've separated that and moved that down into C6 2.23. Be very cautious when you're looking at these that you don't want to be in the right church but the wrong pew type thing. The verbiage is similar going through all of these Z codes. And uh, if you're new to this, again, it can be problematic until you get that kind of familiarity with the descriptions and where the codes are related to the descriptions. If you're used to using these SDOH codes, again, they've just tweaked them a little bit to find or broke out those combos of that we've seen and given them their own description. So again, what we probably see a lot is grandparent. Again, where I'm located, we see a lot of child custody with the grandparent. Now, they've also added, again, under here, that's if applicable, going back up to this, we're probably going to see these multiple times related to other codes, that if the child is in welfare custody, then Z6 2.21. Uh, Now, note that the difference in Z6 2.23 and Z6 2.24, it's actually pretty subtle. So we still have our child in custody of non-relative guardian. Guardianship is different than a patient living in the custody of somebody. Guardianship is appointed by the court, and I have a son that just turned 18 that's disabled, and we had to file for guardianship of him. So we had to get a lawyer, we had to go to the judge, and therefore we were granted uh, custody or guardianship so that we can make decisions for him, since his mental status will always stay about an 8-year-old. Again, some people choose not to do that, but what that would mean is that if that patient with the cognitive or intellectual deficit were in a medical situation, you are not able to make those medical decisions for them, but also financially, you're not able to make those decisions for them. And and so again, having guardianship is very, very specific. Make sure you understand the difference between just having custody and guardianship uh, within the system. Now, other specified problems related to upbringing, the six, or excuse me, Z62.8, moving along, we have added under there code also, again, if applicable, absence of family member, Z63.3, there's more characters there because it defines what family member, disappearance and death of family member, as Z6 3.4, disruption of family by separation and divorce, Z6 3.5, other specified problems related to primary support group, Z6 3.8, and other stressful life events affecting family and household, Z6 3.7. So let's look at those a little more in depth. And again, I look forward to hearing your comments if you have scenarios that you've already had come across uh, that would fall in those categories to help educate. Of course, don't be, keep everything redacted and stuff, but to help us better understand some of the scenarios that we need to be looking for. So, absence of a family member could mean a lot of different things. So if a uh, husband or wife separated and one left the house, that would be an absence of a family member. And if that were to cause complications, say for a child, but this isn't necessarily related always to children. Now, again, we just got done looking at the codes for child welfare and custody and guardianship, but you can have guardianship over adults. You can have guardianship over adults that maybe don't have cognitive disabilities, but have other disabilities, or uh, for whatever reason is not able to take care of themselves. Disappearance and death of family member. Now, disappearance and death, that in my opinion, that could be or disappearance or death of family member. I think disappearance and death is a little odd to say it that way. Now, this has been in here before. Uh, the Z6 3.4, they tweaked it a little bit, but the disappearance, if a person leaves, is it considered disappearance? I don't know if any time in your lifetime somebody's ever disappeared that has that they've not been able to find, but I do know uh, again scenarios where a child is abducted or an adult has been abducted for whatever reason, and this can cause complications within the household that fall under behavioral health, but it also can really impact the health and welfare of the family unit. Um, a death of a family member, especially what comes to mind is a spouse dies. Well, that's going to make a burden on the family, or even if it's just two people, a husband and a wife, and one of them passes. We see that uh, very much in elderly people. Uh, say the wife passes and the husband is not used to taking care of the household or feeding themselves, and they get depressed, and then they're not taking their medication as well. What if a spouse passes, and we're not talking about the geriatric age, but that's the person who held the infants, and so that's going to make an impact on their health. What if a child in the family dies, and it can cause all kinds of disruption within the family. Again, we want to make sure that our providers know that these codes are available for us to translate for statistics as it affects the patient's health. How about disruption of family by separation and divorce? Okay, I said, absence of a family member. It could be not necessarily a separation of or divorce, or I think of it as a separation, but maybe it's not a legal separation. Hmm. However they want to define it. Other specified problems related to primary support group and stressful life events affecting family and household. Well, could you use two of these? What if there was a death of a family member, and the result has also been that the stress it has increased within that family unit. So you might actually be able to apply, might be applicable to apply more than one of these. The Z6 3.7, because a child died, there was a death in the family, and that it's become very stressful for the entire family unit and household as they are adjusting. Uh, let's move on. Z6 2.82, parent-child conflict. Well, that is just extremely common. I don't know how many of you have raised teenagers, but we have. We had 6 kids, and only one is not a legal adult, and he will be. He's turning 17 this year, the baby of the family. So we know that it's common to have parent-child conflict. They uh, they kept that pretty much the same as far as the definition, but what they did add is parent stepchild conflict, which is more definitive. And we see a lot of families coming together with siblings or children from a previous marriage. That's very, very common. And if there is any type of uh, uh, it doesn't necessarily have to be a um, I, I don't want to be presumptuous, but that causes a lot of tension usually. Now, it doesn't have to mean that everybody is extremely at each other's throats. That's not, we don't have to worry about it going that side of the pendulum. It could still just be conflict as people are trying to get used to living with each other, making the household larger. So again, when we say conflict, again, that doesn't mean that everybody's, um, depressed or everybody is fighting each other all the time. No, it could just be everybody's adjusting. But for the providers to know that this is available and how that would affect the health of the family or the family unit would definitely change medical decision making for that provider. Let's move on to expanding that to Z62.831 non parental relative child conflict. So, grandparent, kinship care, non parent, legal guardian, child conflict, or other relative conflict. What if you had a cousin that was causing conflict, or again, grandparents are often um, helping raise children, but that's not the same thing. This is where there's a conflict between the grandparent and the child. But what about a non or other relative? Again, I think of cousin, but non-parent relative, legal guardian. So let's say the uncle and the aunt one of them take care of a child, and there's a conflict. And there would be, right? If you're adjusting, getting used to having to stay with somebody when you're not used to them, again, that would be applicable in that scenario. Now, there is an excludes group home staff child conflict, has its own area. That's a Z62.833. Moving back up to the group home. Now, orphanage, but they're saying specifically group home. We have a group home, several group homes in our area that are fabulous. And I'm sure there has to have conflict within them, but they end up having 4 to 6 children with a house parent, a couple, and they all have their own room, and they're exclusive to that house, and they do everything as a family together, and it runs pretty smoothly for the most part. But again, they do have conflict, so that's where that would be applicable. Moving on to backing up a little bit, Z62.832, not 833, non-relative guardian child conflict. They added the excludes again within them the group home staff child conflict. I'm sure you guys are much more experienced to some of these than I am, and can start seeing where you've seen documentation regarding scenarios and thinking, oh, now we have a code to cover that. And it does affect, ultimately what we're talking about is it affecting the health of the patient, not just that maybe they're depressed, they're sad, they're anxious or anything, but their ability to obtain health care would also be included in here. Let's see. So we did the Z62.833. Let's move on. The Z62.89 is classified as other specified problems related to upbringing. And within that category, they added uh, Z62.892, runaway from current living environment. Does not matter where the person is living, the child leaving leaving a living situation without permission. That could be the family home, that could be a relative, that could be a group home. That again could be an extended family relative. They left without permission. We're going to wrap it up with the next few codes. We are now into the Z65 codes, problems related to other psychosocial circumstances. And they have the Z65.8. When we look under other specified problems related to psychosocial circumstances, they included at risk for feeling loneliness. This is a broad stroke. I don't think there's anybody out there that hasn't felt lonely at one time. But then you add in the verbiage at risk for feeling loneliness. Okay, that might be everybody. Um, However, we want our providers to know that this has been expanded and is available within the code set. Then when you move on to uh, some of the others. There was no changes in persons with potential health hazards related to family and personal history and certain conditions influencing health status, the Z77.Z99 codes. Hopefully, again, this is one small section of the new area of that was added to the SDOHs for 2024. You can take these and share them with your providers and with your coders. Give them a heads up. Make sure, discuss them. Make sure that you all understand them and the additions and the changes. And if you have patients that fall into these categories, that your providers know that these code changes are available for you to translate. Uh, Again, these are up on the cms.gov site. We just shared it here with you. There is a lot of other new codes, but we wanted to break these down specifically to kind of give you a heads up. Social determinations of health, a hot topic, and we want to make sure that we're capturing everything to the highest specificity. And I suspect that we'll continue to see these updated and changed in the years to come as we're able to better define what's happening in our society that will affect patients' health outcomes. And in my opinion, it does truly show a an uptick in medical decision making when a provider has to work around some of these scenarios that they're dealing with, and how to expand behavioral health care for our patients. So 2024 social determinations of health in the ICD-10-CM code set, the new changes for that area. We're going to come with more changes in the near future. If there's a specific area that you want to know about, let us know. And you can reach out to us at cco.us/topic request. And we'll make sure to get those studied and maybe create these little 1-pagers or 2-pagers to make sharing uh, that knowledge easier for you. All right, guys. Thank you, and we'll see you next time.
Do you need more medical certification and business training? Learn more at www.cco.us.